ITV. So Stu, thanks so much for joining us. Do you want to just briefly explain your role across ITV and what you're doing there?
Yeah, sure. So I'm head of product for the ITV Hub and Hub Plus. The role and my team kind of really just focusing on the customer experience. So it's really in line with what you've just covered in the deck previously. Our kind of ideals are built around trying to give the customer the best experience they possibly can within VOD. So that's what my team do. Thanks,
Stu. And look, ITV has clearly been disrupted by Netflix, who we talked about, but Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, other players. How are ITV adapting to that disruption?
I think it's interesting because disruption in the VOD market, has really been around for years now, and Netflix has really pioneered the way ahead for us. It's so easy to kind of look at what Netflix are doing and think we need to emulate, their success. They've got a different business model to us, as have Amazon and Disney Plus. They don't have the ad market to contend with as well. If we asked our customers what the biggest issue they faced, they'd come back and say adverts. So it's quite difficult for us to really try and alleviate that customer pain point. And we have done with the likes of Hub Plus. That's why that exists, $3.99 to watch ad-free ITV content. But we've got different challenges to how they've got their challenges. So we're looking at innovation in spaces around, personalizing advertising and using data to try and drive the experience of ads in the same way that we are trying to drive the experience of content as well. So whilst we look at them as disruptors in the VOD space, we're also looking at seeing who are disruptors in the ad space and how can we try and learn from them as well.
Great. And look, we've talked a lot about speed. How particularly your product teams across ITV Hub, how are they able to operate with speed and agility? And is there anything more you think you can do?
Yeah, I mean, there's always more, right? It's always a question about resourcing and trying to use the resourcing in the most intelligent way you can. What's often a challenge for us is we often have to try and resolve issues on the fly. And so because it's a very complicated world, video on demand, and the customer experience is at the very kind of last mile, if you like, of a very long road that's preceding it. And so all the content is being streamed all over the world. We're trying to capture that stream, we're trying to encode it, we're trying to make sure we have the right DRM on that stream. This is all before we get to the customer playout. So what we're trying to do as a product team is make sure that we focus on two separate things. One on the customer experience, making sure that we have the right attention to detail on that, and the other on the platform itself. And by decoupling them, what we're not doing is trying to fix complex kind of real world problems with the likes of AWS and asset management and encryption with customer focused product teams. So by decoupling them, we're able to focus on what's important and make sure we have subject matter expertise on those areas. To answer your question, the kind of acceleration rate really comes down to the size of the teams then. If we doubled in size, tripled in size tomorrow, we could probably find work for them to do. Would the return on investment be there? That's difficult to measure because a lot of it is intrinsically linked with customer data. And so we need that feedback loop to be in place first.
Yeah, that makes sense and goes back to some of the things Ellen and I were talking about in terms of the sort of freedom of product teams or different teams working within the organization. Like, how does that work in terms of how your product teams work into the bigger ITV business?
It's interesting. I think there's certain companies in the world right now that are kind of blessed with not having to go through a transformation. And, the acceleration of companies like Netflix have really come from not being tied into a traditional system, if you like. For us, we've got to try and balance between subject matter experts who understand linear world of television. The people who commission television today, they've come from a linear traditional TV background. So what's quite difficult, and I've experienced this when I've been at the likes of the Telegraph as well, is you get a very traditional company like ITV or BBC or the Telegraph, and they've got their expertise in creating for the Telegraph, a very physical product. And so it's trying to kind of have the conversations with, it's not so much non-digital people. Everyone kind of understands digital to their own degree. The challenge is really trying to put it into terms and language that are kind of symbiotic. Telegraph is probably a better real world example. We're all familiar with the headline on a newspaper. How does that headline on a newspaper convey to different sized tablet screens or a mobile screen? but you're having the same conversation with the people who choose the headline. They're not choosing that headline specifically for Android or choosing that headline specifically for, you know, a 12-inch iPad. So it's trying to have the right conversations with people, I think, it's been the key for me when working within a digital transformation organization, to say, actually, we're having the right conversation, but we need to try and find a kind of common ground language to be able to have it. And that's the challenge for my product teams. How can we find that common ground language to try and make sure we are talking and trying to, you know, strive for the same thing? So that's the real key for me as I see it.
That makes sense. And sort of following on from that, you touched on it a bit, is how are you ensuring that the way you evolve the ITV Hub really is in line with your understanding of customer desires and behaviors?
Yeah, so we're kind of blessed with really great customer insight. So I've not worked anywhere before where we've actually physically spent a huge amount of time gathering customer feedback and information about what they perceive the reality to be. And when I say perceive the reality to be, I'm sure we're all familiar with the adage that, you know, customers will say what they do, but they actually do something quite different on the platform itself. And so whilst we're blessed with that customer insight at a very kind of quantifiable, qualifiable level, what we don't necessarily have is some of the data points that match back to what the customers are saying that we do as well. So we've kind of, you know, we've been speaking to the likes of Mixpanel and trying to better understand how we can use services out there to try and better understand our customers. We are going through a huge digital transformation piece within data as well at the moment. So it's not just about looking at our competitors from a video on demand space and an advertising space, but also how are people using data. And so, you know, just based off what you've been saying previously this morning, I think it's really, you know, the really good examples about if you do use the right data and then you do marry that up to the customer experience, what you've then got is the complete picture. So I'd say for us at the moment, we're in a transition of having really great kind of customer insights and trying to get to the point of having also really great data points. And we do have them, but they don't necessarily align at the moment, and we need to try and find ways that we can join the dots together on them.
That makes sense. And the final one was sort of imagination. So I guess without breaking any ITV sort of corporate secrets, like, are you thinking about new models? Are you reimagining the way ITV connects with audiences in any way?
I think the challenge is always twofold, isn't it? It's always, you know, we've got competitors in our space that are galloping ahead because that's what they're focused on doing, and they've been focused on this for 10 years. You know, ITV's Hub has been around for probably the same amount of time, but it's not always necessarily been our key business focus. The ad market has dictated that, you know, the TV linear advertising is kind of far outweighing that of digital. As those kind of balances start shifting, the focus suddenly becomes back on our product as the hub, you know, to try and how can we actually start making even more revenue from this product. The challenge then is that our competitors, like I say, they're kind of galloping off in a direction that's not been tethered to linear television, perhaps. So I think it would be a mistake for us to just look at the likes of Netflix and Disney Plus and say, well, let's emulate their successes. Let's see what they've done and do that as well. I mean, that's quite easy to do because every week they're seemingly bringing out a new feature, a new interaction, a new platform to consume their content. What we have to try and do, I think, as a business is look to some of the other disruptors in the marketplace. The likes of TikTok is a really good example of a video platform that's commanded a huge amount of attention from a key demographic, but it offers something entirely different. It offers user-created short-form content. And Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus don't necessarily do that. So is there something in that to say, if the same demographic who are watching Love Island are also the same demographic consuming very short-form content very rapidly for kind of potentially hours on end, how can we then try and see if there's something that matches up those two models? And can the hub be a centralized place for something like that? I wouldn't ever suggest, you know, that we have a TikTok-esque service, but short form rapid content might be something that we can do. Consumer generated content could be something that we could do. And so they're the areas that I think it's important for us to not discredit just because they're not what Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney are doing as well.
No, that's interesting. And it's about staying true to what the value of ITV is to its customers, but trying to learn from a broader range of disruptors,
Sure.
and not just trying to emulate what Netflix or Amazon Prime are doing. That makes a lot of sense. Is there anything you think you can learn from them, not necessarily in terms of the services or business models, but ways of working or anything else that you can bring into ITV?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think for us, the shift we need to make is to get faster at making rapid attempts, and fail fast is the key mantra. I think this is one of the issues with transformation, is that failure doesn't necessarily have a home in lots of places, because you've got a traditional business that have overcome, they've crossed that chasm, if you like, and so failure doesn't necessarily ladder up to actual successes in the future. And so I think it's that paradigm shift of trying to understand that failure isn't necessarily a terrible place to be. Like, for example, if we lost the stream of ITV Hub, that's a catastrophic failure. We've lost huge amounts of ad revenue. It's very hard to experiment in that place. But I think you've got to try and find those opportunities to. I was at Betfair for a year or so. Every race you would generate close to £1 million from. How do you experiment in a place where a race can actually generate that much money? And you can't become a victim of your own successes. So I think that the challenge is to try and find those, potentially, you would probably traditionally call it R&D, where you can experiment and you can fail, but they have to have this kind of way of bringing themselves into production at some point. So for us, I think it's trying to find the safety net and make sure that safety net is in place to do that rapid experimentation and testing as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's one of those things that's easy to say, isn't it? Fail fast. But if failing means losing millions of pounds of revenue in the space of 20 minutes, then you need to consider that carefully.
Yeah, and it's also, we work with Candyspace obviously really closely, and the relationship has always been very good. And it's always difficult. You guys are always coming to us with ideas for experimentation and things that we could do differently. But what's hard is trying to then manage the stakeholder expectation. There was actually a question in the chat I noticed from Josh, which talks about balancing speed and quality. That comes into this again, right? Because I think my stakeholders or my team stakeholders are a combination of, so let's say, digital marketing, traditional marketing, digital commercial teams, digital commercial teams. There's all this kind of blend. And so when we're trying to balance that speed and quality, we've got to try and make sure that the quality perception is something which people kind of understand. And so we talk about MMP and MVP often, but the actual MVP solution isn't necessarily the quality expectation of a traditional or someone in a traditional business, but it is the expectation of someone in a digital business. So how you try and balance them, I think it's a good question, because it's almost like you can never really find that perfect sentence or perfect sentiment that aligns every single stakeholder. I think it's more of a one-to-one relationship, and the transparency in the language you use is probably varies depending on who you're talking to. Less information can sometimes be more powerful than more information to other people. So I think that's where that's kind of how I address that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, that balance of speed and quality. And I think, as you say, it comes down to a proven process around, testing, learning, iterating, getting things in customers' hands as quickly as possible, and using the data we talked about to inform what happens next.
Yeah.
There's another question for you, actually, that's come in. Do you link user journeys between digital and TV, or do you see them as separate experiences? So how closely do the VOD team work with the linear team to track across all platforms?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think there's two schools of thought. One is that we should do more of that, and the other is that we should do less of it, right? So there's the people who want to do more see it as there must be a relationship there between people consuming linear television and then carrying on watching that service. What we don't have at the moment is obviously the ability to log into a linear TV. And so on average, about 1.4 people will watch a stream in the evening. So if we see a user or Sky give us some kind of transparency about viewership, it's often from the home. And so we have to try and put a incremental uplift, because it's never really just one-on-one relationship. I mean, kind of 8 o'clock at night, you can kind of expect there to be more than one person watching that TV in the living room. So we roughly kind of bottom out around 1.4 people on average watching per every living room in the UK who's watching ITV. The mapping then, it becomes very difficult, because what we're observing is that the home probably could have, let's say last night's a good example. a living room watching the football and a bedroom watching Love Island. How you kind of join those two experiences together is kind of impossible unless you can log in from a linear TV, or you're using our owned and operated app. But lots of people watch Sky, lots of people watch Virgin. So to answer the question, we want to try and find that common denominator between the kind of linear household viewer and the digital viewer, but we have to make a lot of assumptions to do that right now. There are the kind of technologies that are coming in which can help that. So there's a piece of technology called HBB TV, which is basically a web front end on a linear experience, which comes about from being able to do IP over TV over IP. So you can kind of enable your television to have that web interface. Those technologies will help us get better at this. We still use the traditional barb measure for how many people are consuming television. And that means that we kind of have a box in a certain amount of homes across the UK, and we listen for adverts being played out. It sounds very analog, but actually, it's been the bedrock of TV for a long time to measure how many people are actually consuming content. And so to try and look at how that can replicate in a digital world, might need to go a step further to try and understand about user behaviors in a household. I think it's very difficult. And I think for the time being, it's about assumption making and trying to just interview and speak to enough people to try and understand their behaviors so we can make a kind of educated guess about the usage in a household.
That's great, Stu. And perhaps one more question for you. Dare I ask, have you got any predictions about the future of TV? And I should warn you, this is being recorded. So
yeah, no, I think ITV are going to dominate for the next 20 years. No, I'm just over 40 now, right? And so I've been consuming television myself for pretty much my entire life. I've got 2 young children, and our behaviors as a family have massively changed. My kids they watch lots of Netflix, they watch lots of YouTube. We subscribe to both of those services, so they don't watch any adverts at all. They don't even know what an advert necessarily is. And so my oldest is 10 years old. Come Christmas, when you're saying, what do you want for Christmas? They've got no idea, because they're not influenced by the ad market. And I think the prediction, if sort of trying to see how that plays out in the future, I can only see the kind of increased subscription services, coming in. I think we're in a very fragmented market at the moment in TV. What really is helpful for people is aggregation of content. So understanding where content can be found. I think Apple TV have given rise to basically just searching for a title. You play that title, you may not even know where the source of that title is coming from. And I think we're in a really kind of, rapidly growing market. We've got lots of US competitors who are coming into the TV space as well. Google and Amazon are both kind of creating, their own televisions, their own kind of TV viewing platforms potentially. So it's only going to get more fragmented. And so I think the aggregation is going to become even more important to people to find out what they want to watch. Like, I'm a big advocate of watching the US Office. It hops around between Netflix and Amazon Prime. I pay for both of those services. All I need to do for my Samsung TV is to know I have access to one of those services for it to recommend it as a piece of content to me. I may never actually know I'm in that operating platform. So I think there is going to be a swathe of kind of, it's going to feel a little bit aggregatory like, if that's a word I've just made up probably, because someone's going to come along and go, we can put all this content into one theoretical bucket, and we can make sure that you're served the content that you want to watch, providing you've got access to that service. That all said, I do think there's kind of probably a TikTok clone competitor out there that's probably waiting in the wings, because, given the dominance of that platform and success of it, I think it's probably been very isolated, and the competitor market for it is going to grow as well. So I think that short form content is going to rise.
That's great, Stu. And yeah, you didn't mention the Albanian army, so I think you're pretty safe with those predictions. It's fascinating talking to you. We could talk for a lot longer, but we're running short of time, but really appreciate your insight.
No, thank you. Thanks for the time.